Hey everyone, welcome to the third Svelte Sirens live stream. Today I'm going to be talking about adapters, and this is a pre-recorded talk, so I'm going to go ahead and click play, and afterwards I will have some time for Q&A. So enjoy. What's up everyone? My name is Stephanie Dietz. I work at Vercel on the DevRel team, and today I'm going to talk to you about SvelteKit adapters. First, I'm going to go over what adapters are and why we use them. Then I'll show you how to select the appropriate adapter for your project, how to add it to your project, and then finally how to deploy that project. So before you can deploy a SvelteKit project, you have to adapt it based on where you're going to host it. In today's world, we have all these different serverless providers, and Svelte's solution to becoming serverless first is through the use of adapters. Basically, we have different platforms such as Vercel and Netlify, and while they do have similar functionality, they each have their own vendor-specific implementation. So in order to ensure that Svelte runs seamlessly on each platform, we have to use the specified adapter. And each adapter does a few major things. So here in the SvelteKit documentation under adapters, it gives you a list of everything an adapter should do. And if you want to read through this, you can do that. But essentially altogether, there are three major things that an adapter needs to do. It needs to copy Svelte's compiled client-side JavaScript bundles and static files to the serverless hosting directory. It needs to copy Svelte's server-side JavaScript bundles, as well as platform-specific render functions to the serverless functions directory. And then it creates the redirects configuration with the catch-all route to the serverless render function. In simpler terms, and the most important thing for you to understand about adapters, is that an adapter is a plugin that takes your app as an input during build, and it generates an output suitable for deployment on that specific platform. So let's scroll back up to the top of this adapter section in the documentation. And down under supported environments, we see that SvelteKit provides adapters for Vercel, Netlify, and Cloudflare pages, as well as two non-service-based adapters. We have the adapter node, which I'm going to talk about later in this video, as well as adapter static, which again, I'm going to go over how to add these to your projects and deploy with these in a bit. But first, let's talk about deploying to Vercel. So depending on where we're going to host our app, we have to import the appropriate adapter. So for instance, if we were going to host our app using Vercel, we would first have to install the adapter Vercel and use that in our svelte config.js file. Recently, however, there's a new adapter that was created called Adapter Auto, and this is the default adapter. So anytime you create a new SvelteKit project, this adapter will already be installed, and it makes deploying SvelteKit apps feel like magic. So let's start off by creating a new SvelteKit demo app, and we'll go over Adapter Auto and how it works. And then we can deploy this project to Vercel with little to no work on our end. So let's pull open our terminal, and we can initiate a new SvelteKit demo project by running npm init svelte at next because it's still in beta, and then the name of our app. I'm going to say adapter example and click enter, and it's going to prompt us to answer a few questions. So first, it wants to know which Svelte app template I want to use, and I want the demo project, so I'm going to select this first one. And then just to keep things simple, I'm going to say no to all these other ones, but you can obviously configure your project however you want to. Then we just move into our project directory. We have to npm install, and then we can run this locally once it finishes installing. All right, so now it's running at localhost 3000, and we can go check it out really quickly. All right, so here's the demo app that it creates for us. It has this little counter component, it has some routing, and then a little to-do app. You can type in items and it adds to it. You can check them off. But what we care more about right now is the actual code. So let's pull this open in our text editor. All right, so here we have our project pulled open, and we moved into our svelte.config.js file. And we see that we're importing Adapter Auto, and we are using it in our project as our adapter. So there's no additional work needed on our end. We don't need to install the adapter ourselves. And with Adapter Auto, this app can already be hosted on Vercel as well as other platforms. Now, if you're familiar with SvelteKit, you're probably wondering like, hey, don't we need to install the adapter Vercel? And a couple months ago, this would have been true. You would have had to install and use the Vercel adapter in your Svelte config file, so in this file, before deploying it. But now that we have adapter auto, it makes this setup unnecessary. Basically, when we deploy this to Vercel, the adapter will automatically choose the appropriate adapter for the current environment. So in our case, when we deploy this to Vercel, it's going to detect that we're using Vercel, and it will add the Vercel adapter for us. And then the Vercel adapter will create the Vercel app using a function for dynamic server rendering. So let's go ahead and test this out by deploying it to Vercel. But first, I need to create a new repo on GitHub and commit all this code to it. Okay, so let's create a new repo. I'm going to call it adapter demo. I'll keep it public and just create the repository. Now I'm just going to copy this code and head back into my terminal. I'm going to go ahead and stop running this locally and just paste the code I copied in. Now I'm going to say git status. I'm going to add all of it and commit it. Just say first as the message, and then let's push. Okay, so now our repo is up to date with all of our most recent code. So let's go to vercel.com and get this deployed. Okay, so we're at vercel.com and you can either log in or sign up. I think they take you to the same page. It's going to prompt you to sign in with some sort of Git. So I use GitHub for this repo, so let's sign in with GitHub. Now you can see all of my repositories are here and I can just select the one that I want to deploy and import it. So we want to import our adapter demo. I'm going to keep the name as is and just click deploy. So now our adapter auto is detecting that we're using Vercel and it's adding the Vercel adapter for us. And then Vercel is doing all the configuration behind the scenes. All right, so let's wait for this to finish deploying. It's going to take a few seconds. Almost there. All right, so let's click on this and visit it. So here we have our app. We still have our homepage with the counter component, our about page, and to-dos. We can add some to-dos and check them off. So it looks great. And this is being hosted at our default Vercel domain, which we could change if we wanted to. So you can see that deploying to Vercel with Adapter Auto is extremely simple, but it's important to note that not all platforms are supported by Adapter Auto. So in the case that you encounter a platform that is not supported by this adapter, you may need to add that platform's adapter yourself, or you may need to use one of the non-service-based adapters. So for example, let's go to Heroku.com and try to deploy this exact same app with our Adapter Auto. All right, so here we are in our Heroku dashboard. I'm going to click New and create a new app. The app name will just be Adapter Demo, just like our other one, and let's create. Now I'm going to do this through GitHub again, which I already have my GitHub connected, and I need to enter in the repo name, which I think I called it Adapter Demo also, right? Let's see, search. Yep, adapter demo. So I'm going to connect to that. And I'm going to deploy our main branch. So this, once again, is going to take a few seconds. Let's wait for it. And we can see what it gives us. All right, so now it has been deployed. Let's go visit it in a new tab. And we see there is an application error. This is because the SvelteKit app is not adapted correctly for Heroku. Since there is no Heroku adapter, Adapter Auto cannot add the correct adapter. Instead, what we need to do is add our adapter node to this project. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so now we're back in our terminal and we can install our node adapter by running the command npm i at svelte.js/adapter-node at next. Enter, and we will let this install. Now, if we go back into our text editor, where we are importing Adapter Auto, we can just switch Auto to Node. And just like that, our node adapter is now being used. Pretty easy, right? So now we have the adapter node installed. So when we build this app, it's going to generate a self-contained node app inside of our build directory. So let's go ahead and run the command npm run build in our terminal, and we'll look at what adapter node generates for us. So back in the terminal, npm run build. It's going to build our application. And if we head back to our code, we'll see we now have this build folder, which wasn't there previously. And we also have this .SvelteKit folder, which contains our Svelte code input. So depending on what adapter we use, this code will be used as the input to generate our output in the build folder. If we open the build folder, we see our compiled code. And notice if we click through some of these files, there's no trace of Svelte. So in this case, we're using the adapter node, so the output is a straight up Node.js app, which can be hosted anywhere that hosts Node. Now we see we have a few folders. We have our client code, our pre-rendered pages, our server-side code, and we also have this index.js file. And this is our main Node server. So since this is just a Node application, we should be able to run it in production by running the command node build. So let's go back to our terminal and say node build /index.js. And now we see it's running on port 3000. So let's go check it out in our browser. And here we see a production build of our site running in Node, and it works exactly as we'd expect it to. Now we have the correct adapter installed, but if we were to commit these changes and deploy it to Heroku, we'd still get an error saying that our build failed. And this is because the SvelteKit template does not have a start script, which is going to be looked for by Heroku. So in our package.json, let's add a start script. I'm going to move into that really quickly. Package.json. We're going to add a script start, and we will just say node build index.js. Now we're ready to commit this to our GitHub and try deploying it to Heroku again. So back in our terminal, I'm going to stop running this, and I'll say git status. All right, let's add all of that. Commit. We just added node adapter, and we can push. All right, so now if we go back to our Heroku dashboard, let's simply click deploy branch. And now it will run the build again. All right, our app is deployed. Let's copy this URL and visit it. Here we see Heroku has successfully deployed our app, and it still works exactly as we'd expect it to, which is great. So the last thing I want to go over is the adapter static. Now, most adapters will generate static HTML for any pre-renderable pages, but in some cases, the entire app might be pre-renderable, in which case we can use the adapter static. And a static site can be hosted just about anywhere. We can use the adapter static just like we did our adapter node. So let's start by installing it. This time, instead of node, we just switch that word for static. So back in our terminal, we will say npm install @SvelteJS /adapter-node @next. Oops, I just said node. We need to do static. So we will do that same command, but instead of node, static. Enter. Now we are installing our static adapter, and back in our code, just like we did before, instead of node, swap that out for static. Now let's delete this build folder and build it again in our terminal. And let's look at what that generated. If we open up our build folder, we see that it generated all these HTML files, since this time the entire site is static. Now let's commit these changes so that we can redeploy this to Vercel. Now back in our terminal, we can say git status, add all of them, commit, we just added adapter static, and push. Let's head back to vercel.com. And one thing that's cool about Vercel is that anytime there is a new commit to main, it's going to automatically deploy it. And we see we have an error here. And I think I know what the issue is. Let's go to settings. And down here where we have our output directory, let's change that to build and save it. Now I'm going to try to redeploy our last one. Redeploy, redeploy, and let's see. So let's visit it. And now we see our app. However, if we go to our to-do list, you'll notice that we can no longer add any to-dos, and that's because this was generated static. So we lose that functionality, but we should only be using adapter static for static sites, so this shouldn't really matter. The last thing I want to touch on is that there are also some community adapters. So if we head back to the SvelteKit docs under adapters, I'm going to collapse this really quick, and scroll down, you can see they have a section for community adapters. If we click this link, it will show some community adapters you can use in your projects. So for instance, here's an adapter to deploy your app with Firebase. And you can even create your own adapter. So back in the docs, if we scroll down a little bit, you can see there's a section on writing custom adapters, and they list everything the adapter should do and just how to get started with that. All right, well, that just about sums up everything adapter related. I hope you learned something, and thanks for tuning in. All right, so now I'll go over some questions. I really only saw one question, which was asking how we can use multiple adapters. And you really wouldn't use multiple adapters if you wanted to host your site, say on Vercel and also Netlify. Well, first of all, we have adapter auto, so you would just use that one. But let's say you had to use two different ones. You would just install the appropriate adapter, build it for that platform, and then install the other adapter and build it for that platform. You wouldn't really use multiple adapters in your project. Other than that, I did not see any other questions. So make sure you follow us on our Twitter and join our Discord channel. Also, if you're interested in tuning in, tomorrow we have a live stream, and we also have our next talk on February 14th. Jen will be talking about SvelteKit animations, so make sure you tune in for that. Thanks for joining, and I hope you learned something.